Senator, you're leading this bill along with Senator Amy Klobuchar. It's a bipartisan effort. How confident are you can get this over the finish line?
Well, listen, I'm very confident. We've got right now 12 co-sponsors on the bill, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. This is an issue that really cuts across partisan lines, ideological lines. There's a real need here. People are being victimized. We're seeing thousands upon thousands of people being targeted, predominantly women and teenage girls. And what our bill does, it's called the Take It Down Act. It does 2 things. Number one, it makes it a federal crime to put non-consensual, intimate images online, including deep fakes using AI, and we're seeing that happening more and more. But number 2, it gives victims the right to have big tech take those images down. Right now, big tech typically stonewalls victims. It leaves the offending images up there sometimes in perpetuity. This puts a federal legal responsibility on big tech to remove the images and all the copies of those images within 48 hours of the victim or the victim's family notifying them.
Senator, why stop there? We're in the middle of an election cycle in which there is great concern about the way deepfakes of potentially people like presidential candidates could be circulating on these very same platforms. Why not use this legislation to try to hold them accountable for that, too? Well,
listen, there are broader issues that concern AI generally, that concern deepfakes and fraud, and those are issues that need to be addressed and will be addressed over time, and there are lots of different legislative vehicles to do so. This is really focused on a very real and growing problem, and I'll tell you, it was actually first drawn to my attention in a direct way by a Texas constituent, by a then 14-year-old girl named Elliston Berry, who lives in Aledo, Texas, just outside Fort Worth. And one morning, Elliston woke up. It was a Monday morning. She was getting ready to go to 9th grade, and her phone started blowing up with phone calls and texts because another teenage boy had taken a picture of her, an image from social media, a very innocent image, and had used an app to create a deep fake image that made her appear naked, and then had created several fake Snapchat accounts and had sent those naked pictures to her classmates. And it was her and several other girls in the 9th grade. And so Elliston woke up. She went into her mom's room just crying because her friends were all seeing what they thought were naked pictures of her. Then they weren't. They were complete fakes. But the nightmare that Elliston went through, she went in, they found out the boy who did it ultimately. He was transferred to another school, but he faced no legal consequences for tormenting her like this. And then she spent 9 months trying to get Snapchat to take down the images. And I'll tell you, Julie, it was remarkable. Last week, her mother was in my office, and she told me, she said, you know, the images are still there. I said, all right, that is ridiculous. I told my staff, get on the phone with Snapchat right now. And I said, if need be, put me on the phone with the CEO of Snapchat. Within the hour, they pulled the images down. Well, you know what? It shouldn't take a sitting senator making a phone call on your behalf to get those images down. Any victim, any teenager in Texas should have the right to get those offensive and false pictures removed. And this bill will put that obligation on big tech to do that.
Senator, I want to turn to other legislation that you have introduced. No Tax on Tips Act. This is coming out. But the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget says that removing these taxes could end up costing billions of dollars, $250 billion in up to 10 years. So how do you make up for that tax revenue?
Well, listen, there are all sorts of projections on tax cuts, and often you get projections that show a real negative impact on the federal budget. I can tell you in most instances, those projections don't come through. So for example, the 2017 tax cuts, which were the biggest tax cut of a generation, there were groups that were projecting enormous negative impacts on federal revenue. What actually happened is federal tax revenue went up every single year since those tax cuts
But so too did the deficit,
effect.
Senator. Just mathematically, if you have less revenue coming in,
the deficit,
you typically would need to therefore reduce spending. And the pot of non-defense discretionary spending that doesn't have entitlements is quite small. If we're also talking about making those 2017 tax cuts permanent, potentially not taxing tipped income either, how mathematically does it work? What specifically do you cut?
Okay, so the most important word you said there was mathematically. After the 2017 tax cuts, in 2018, in 2019, we saw total federal tax revenue go up and go up significantly. That's simple math. It was contrary to the projections. Now, you're right, the deficit went up. Why? Because politicians spent like crazy. They spent like drunken sailors, but the tax cut increased federal tax revenues. And I'll tell you when it comes to tips, look, the people earning tips, they're waiters and waitresses and barbers and hairstylists and taxi cab drivers and Uber drivers and all sorts of people that are struggling, in nail salons, and they're working hourly wages. They're climbing the economic ladder. And I got to tell you, this is a proposal Donald Trump rolled out in Nevada. And I think it is exactly right. We ought to be fighting for all of those people who are working and they're struggling to pay the bills. And I think this is the right thing to do. I think it is fair. I think it'll make a difference in their lives. And I'm proud to be leading the fight. We're going to get this done. When President Trump is reelected and we have a Republican Senate next year, we will exempt all tips, will be tax-free, zero federal income taxes, and that's going to have a big impact on millions of working men and women across this country.
Senator, I want to make sure we get to the border before we let you go. As you know, the president has announced new executive actions regarding the border. Yes, there has been criticism to this. However, Congress didn't get anything over the finish line regarding the border and immigration. Is it time that Congress can come to an agreement and put something in permanently?
Well, absolutely, Congress should pass strong legislation securing the border. And you know what? The House of Representatives did so. The House of Representatives passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. It would be the strongest border legislation ever enacted. Now, I got to tell you, Joe Biden and Colin Allred and the Democrats, they opposed that. They opposed that across the board. Colin Allred voted no. Democrats in the Senate, every single Democrat in the Senate voted no. And the reason we have chaos at the southern border, the reason we have the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history, 11 million illegal immigrants under Joe Biden, is because Joe Biden and Colin Allred and the Democrats, they want this invasion at our southern border, and they're unwilling to secure the border. Now, here's the good news. Joe Biden broke the border through a unilateral executive action. The good news is when President Trump is reelected in November, we will fix the border and secure it again. And the reason I know we will do it is because I worked hand in hand with President Trump, and we did it before. Joe Biden inherited the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. We did it before, and we'll do it again.
Well, Senator, you bring up former President Trump. Former President Trump, of course, didn't like the bipartisan deal that was negotiated between Republican and Democratic senators with the White House. Even if H.R. 2 were to go to the floor of the Senate, do you really believe Trump would want that passed in an election year?
Absolutely, yes. And look, understand the, quote, bipartisan bill was a Chuck Schumer bill that was a terrible bill. It would have made the problem worse. It put into law, it codified Joe Biden's open border policies. It codified catch and release. It gave millions of illegal immigrants work permits the instant they crossed the border. It paid for taxpayer-funded lawyers for illegal immigrants. It gave billions of dollars to the NGOs that are assisting the human traffickers. And it normalized 5,000 illegal immigrants a day. That's 1.8 million a year, every year in perpetuity. That was the Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden open borders bill. It was a terrible bill, which is why it failed within 24 hours of its text being released, because it wouldn't fix the problem. It would in many ways make it worse.